Myself, Professor Dr. S.L. Sananse, Department of Statistics, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, Marathwada University, Aurangabad. Today, I am going to give lecture on sampling techniques in research. Today, we learn sampling techniques and concepts, sampling techniques and sampling and non-sampling errors, sampling methods and procedures, distinguish between probability and non-probability samples, and discuss advantages and disadvantages of various samplings. And we shall also cover some data collection methods. First of all, I will give you what is meant by statistics. Statistics is a science of drawing valid inferences in the face of uncertainty. Statistics also a data collection, classification and tabulation, and analysis and interpretation of the results. So this is meant by statistics, means there are certain steps in statistics. First step is data collection. Second step is data classification and tabulation. Third step is analysis, and fourth step is interpretation of the results. And for interpretation of results, you need some statistical methods, and especially sampling is used for this purpose. Then when we talk of statistics, there are two parts, that is data, and we have to collect the data, and from analysis of data we get the information. So statistics is related with the data, and from after analysis of data we get the information. So there are different methods of collecting data, right? When we say of sampling methods, in that we have to collect the information, or we have to collect the data. So it includes the direct observation, experiments and surveys. Direct observation is one of the method of collecting data by which we can go to the respondent and collect the information directly with the help of questionnaires. And on the basis of objective, we frame the questionnaires and we collect the data from the respondent. So that is direct observations we are taking from the respondent. So that is the method of direct personal investigation. Second method of collection of data is the experiment, for which we have to conduct the research experiment in the laboratories for physics, chemistry and other students. They have to collect the information or the data through the experiments. And last method is the survey method, by which we have to conduct the survey. And collection of survey methods is very important in social science research. So when we talk of sampling, there are two words very important: population and sample. So you have to remember these two words. What is meant by population and what is meant by sample. So what is population? Population is nothing but total number of units under study is called population. Means population for a student, research student, can be different for each and every problem, right? So suppose my population can be different and other student population can be different. So total number of units under study is nothing but population, or the collection of all measurements or counts is nothing but also a population. So you have to remember that population means total number of units under study, that is called population. And sample means, what is my sample? A unit or group of units selected from population with some specified procedure is nothing but a sample. So when we say sampling, there are two words important: population and sample. You have to remember these two words, that is population, total number of units under study, and sample means some units or group of units selected from population with some specified procedure is nothing but a sample. So these two words are very important, and we have to remember that before we go for the techniques of the sampling. Then there is a problem, why there is a sample, why we should take a sample, why not the population, why not the complete enumeration. So when we talk of the samples, when there is a finite population, then we can go for the population studies. But when there is an infinite population, in that case there is no alternative. And in case of finite or infinite population also, if the sample population size is more, in that case there is no alternative rather than going for a sample. So what is sample? That is parts or group of some units selected from the population with some scientific procedure, we call it as a sample. So sample is also very important, and it saves time, money and energy, because if you want to represent the population, you have to take a representative sample. That is also very important. And sometimes we go for a total population also, but in case of a infinite population, it is not possible to go for a infinite population. So sample survey or sampling study is very important, and therefore we call it as a sampling techniques that is used in the research. and in the research methodology. So, as I have told you that why we should go for a sample. So, it is a less cost, it has less cost, less field time, then more accuracy, because as the population sample size increases, definitely there will be the method of collection of data, there is a more cost, there is a more exertion on that. So, if you take a representative sample, definitely there will be a more accuracy on that. And when it is impossible to study the whole population, in that case there is no alternative rather than going for a sample. So, you have to think of sample rather than going for a population. Then some basic concepts that we have to learn in the sampling. So, what is the first concept? Sampling unit. What is the sampling unit? That we can say that smallest unit from which samples can be selected, that is nothing but a sampling unit. For example, if you are conducting a survey and our last unit is a farmer or respondent, then in that case our sampling unit is that farmer or that respondent. So, this is a sampling unit on which we collect the information, that is very important sampling unit in the sampling theory. Then sampling frame. What is the sampling frame? It includes list of all sampling units from which samples is drawn. For example, sampling frame, if you are taking any research problem, selection of district can be one stage, then selection of tehsils, then selection of villages, selection of the respondents or the farmers, that is your sampling frame. So, selection procedure, that is a district, tehsils, then all the selection procedures of villages, and then respondent, that is a sampling frame. And there are different sampling scheme that is to be implemented while going for a different sampling methods. Then when we talk of sampling, there are two types of error we are making. First one is a sampling error and non-sampling error. We have to think of these two things very important, because when we are selecting samples from the population with some specified procedure, we are likely to make two types of error, sampling error and non-sampling error. So, sampling error refers to difference between the sample and the population that exists only because of the observation that happen to be selected for the sample. Random, you have no control over, right. So, sampling error is a very important thing that is to be considered while studying the sampling. The non-sampling errors, that is also we have to think of these errors, then they are more serious and are due to mistakes made in acquisition of data or due to the sample observation being selected improperly, most likely caused by poor planning, sloppy work and other things that is responsible for non-sampling errors. So, what are the characteristics that we should know for non-sampling error? The sampling error, that it generally decreases in the magnitude as the sample size increases, then depends on the variability of the characteristics of the interest in the population, and can be accumulated for and reduced by an appropriate sample plan, and can be measured and controlled in probability sample surveys. So, controlling of sampling errors is very important, and there are different things that are related with the sampling error. So, for research student, those who are in the social sciences, they need to know the sampling errors. So, these errors arises because of data has been collected from a part rather than the whole of the population. Because of the above, sampling errors are restricted to sample surveys only, unlike non-sampling errors that can occur in both sample surveys and the census data. Further, there are no sampling errors in census because the calculations are based on entire population. Therefore, there is no question of sampling error. So, these sampling error are measured from the sample data. In case of a probability sample, more will be discussed in detail in more advanced modules of the training programs. So, one thing we have to remember, that increase in sample size will definitely reduce the type of errors. So, you have to increase the appropriate sample size is very, very important. Then there are different non-sampling errors. So, why these non-sampling errors occurs in the sampling? So, that occurs because of errors in data acquisition, non-response errors and selection bias. So, these things are very, very important, that non-sampling errors are more serious and are due to mistakes made in the acquisition of data or due to the sample observation being selected improperly. So, these things are to be very important and you have to consider these things. So, we have to note that increasing the sample size will not reduce this type of error. Sampling error can be reduced because of increasing sample size, but non-sampling error, increasing the sample size will not reduce this type of error. So, this you have to remember, and there are different ways by which we can make the errors in data acquisition, that is incorrect measurement being taken because of faulty equipments. Mistakes are made during transactions from primary sources. Further, interactions recording of data due to misinterpretation of terms and inaccurate responses to questions concerning sensitive issues. So, these things are very important. So, that is the error in data acquisitions that occurs when the sampling plan is such that some members of the target population cannot possibly be selected for inclusion in the sample. Then what are the sources of non-sampling error that we can list? Defects in the sampling frame, failure to identify the target population, then non-response error, then responses given by the respondent if they are not good, then in that case we can get more non-sampling errors, then data processing and reporting amongst other, that also increases the non-sampling errors. So, there are what can be done for reducing the non-sampling errors? First, we have to use up-to-date and accurate sampling frame. Careful selection of the time of the survey is to be conducted. Planning for follow-up of a non-respondent. Careful questionnaire design. Providing training and periodic training of the respondents of the implementing staff. This will definitely reduce the non-sampling errors. Then non-sampling errors, as mentioned earlier, that response rate, that is the proportion of all the people selected who complete the survey, is a key survey parameter and helps in the understanding the validity of the survey and sources of non-response error. Say we have seen now, students, we have seen that sampling error and non-sampling error and different data collection methods. Now, we shall move to these types of sampling. Definitely, when we say the sampling techniques for research and especially the research methodology, we have to think of types of sampling. So, when we talk of type of sampling, there are two types of sampling. There are, first is the probability samples, probability sampling and non-probability samples. So, probability samples and non-probability samples, they are very important because both probability and non-probability samples are required in the research, and we will talk of these probability samples and non-probability samples in details. So, first of all, when we say the probability sample means, what is meant by probability sample? Means when we say this is a probability samples, this means that probability of selection of the units, sampling units, or equal probability of selection to all the units in the population is given, that we call as a random sample or probability sample, right. But in case of a purposive sampling or non-probability samples, the probability the purposive sampling is used, that is when the purpose of the study is decided. In that case, we may not go for a probability sampling, but we should go for a purposive sampling. But when you use the purposive sampling, it should be taken care that one stage of the sampling should be at least a random sample in that. So, when we say there are different types, so types of sampling, there are different types of sampling. We are going to discuss more in detail different types of sampling, that is simple random sample, systematic random sampling, stratified random sampling, multi-stage sampling, multi-phase sampling, cluster sampling. These are all random samples, probability sampling or random samplings. And there are also certain non-probability samplings, that is convenience sampling, purposive sampling and quota sampling. These samplings are there, definitely that we have to think of. Then one question definitely comes into mind, that every students ask the question that what should be the sample size for the survey. So, it is very difficult to say for how much sample is to be taken for the particular survey. somebody says 5%, somebody says 1%, somebody says 10%. So, instead of that there is some formula that is proposed here, and here that formula is proposed by which we can find out the exact sample size required for that. So, here, but here one thing is that here when we say this, we should have n is equal to z square into v divided by d square into bracket x bar square. So, this n is a sample size, z is the value of the standard normal variate, then v is a sampling variance, and d is a margin of error, and x bar is a sampling mean. In this we should know all the things, then only we can estimate this, otherwise it is very difficult to measure the sample size required. And so what I will suggest that one should see that a representative sample is to be selected which will definitely represent the population. So, you have to think of the representative sample size. If you select representative sample size for your research study, definitely you will get a good results. Then sampling process comprises of several steps, that is specifying the we have to first of all define the population. My dear student, I will tell you here that you have to define first of all what is your population of your study, and then once you define the population, you have to also specify your sampling frame, which will include all the steps in the selection process, that you have to give the sampling frame, that is a set of atoms or event possible to measure, right. Then specifying the sampling methods for selecting atoms or events from the frame, that also you have to give the which sampling method you are going to use. Then determine the sample size required for that. Then implementing the sampling plan, you have to implement a sampling plan, and once the sampling plan is implemented, next step will be data collection and reviewing the sampling process. So, these things are very important. Now, we will come to the first sampling method, that is called a simple random sampling, right. We know random sampling means in random sampling each and every unit in the population get an equal chance to be included in the sample. So, equal probability of selection to all the units of the population, we call it as a random sample, right. And we say it a simple random sampling. Why this simple word is there? So, simple word means without modifying the population, heterogeneous population, we are selecting some samples from the population without modifying the population. So, this is a simple way of just selecting a random sample from the population. So, we can select directly. So, this is a simple random sampling in which we are not modifying the population. So, here it is important that all subsets of the frame are given an equal probability. Each element of the frame thus has an equal probability of selection. It provides for greater number of possible samples. This is done by assigning a number to each unit in the sampling frame. A table of random number or lottery system is used to determine which units are to be selected. So, the question comes how to select the samples from the population. So, for this there is a different random number tables are there. It is available at the end of statistics book, or there are certain tables that is also there in the library. You can go to library, there are certain random number tables are there. In government offices they have also printed some random number books. So, that can be used for selecting the samples. So, that is to be used, and whenever there is no random number tables available, in that case you can use the lottery method. That is also important, that you can make the cheats and select without any bias. So, that is also important, but a better way is to going for using the random numbers that is available in all the statistics textbooks as well as in the some special tables, that is the statistical tables. Then most of the studies we use simple random sampling because it is very simple and it gives a good results also, but sometimes there are advantages and disadvantages also. So, when we say advantages, there are advantages of this simple random sampling. Here we say estimates are easy to calculate because we have to just select from the population the samples. So, estimates are easy to calculate. Simple random sampling is always an EPS design, but not all EPS designs are simple random sampling. So, these are the advantages, and most important advantage of this simple random sampling is that it is very simple to use, and in most of the cases this gives equal chances to all the units in the population. So, this method gives better results, and there are, even though this is there are certain advantages, disadvantages also. What are these advantages? We will see the important one. There are so many, but we will see important one. If sampling frame is large, this method is impracticable, because there are sometimes you will get a heterogeneous population, and in heterogeneous population means when we select samples from the heterogeneous population. So, in that case sometimes sampling frame, if it is large, this method is impracticable, because selecting samples from a large heterogeneous population makes sometimes leads to wrong conclusion. Then minority subgroups of interest in population may not be present in sample in sufficient number of study. Therefore, this is also very important one. Then I have selected it from this example from the internet for you. Simple random samples, how it has been selected. This gives simple random means once you select, you use the random number tables, and you use, once you use the random number tables, we can select the appropriate sample size from your population. Means once you have to make the list of the population units, sampling units, and from that randomly you can select one by one, and these random numbers can be generated. Here I have given, here you see 20 number is selected, 27 is selected, 29 is selected according to random numbers, and you can have the name of this. So, this I have taken from internet, and you can see this, that these methods have been explained here. So, replacement of selected units, that is also very important. When we say simple random sampling, there are two types: simple random sampling without replacement and simple random sampling with replacement. What is meaning of this? Simple random sampling without replacement means sampling units once selected is not taken back into population, is not kept back into population after recording its observations. So, that is called without replacement. Once the samples are selected, they are not kept back in the population after recording their observation. So, this is called without replacement, simple random sampling without replacement. There is other method also, that is called simple random sampling with replacement. With replacement means observation once they are selected, their observations are recorded, and again it is kept back in the population. So, we say it is a with replacement sampling. So, both the samplings can be used in the research, that is without replacement and with replacement. Here one example I have quoted here. If you catch fish, measure them and immediately return them to the water before continuing the sample, this is a without replacement design, because we might end up catching and measuring the same fish more than once. However, if we do not return the fish to the water, example, if you eat that fish, this becomes a without replacement. So, both the things we have to think, that once the fish are selected, if they are for research purpose, after taking observation again it is kept in that pond, and after without replacement sampling, once we have taken observation, it is not kept back in that pond. So, this is the important thing, that we should also know the concept of without replacement and with replacement sampling, that these things are very important. Then another sampling method is a systematic random sampling. Systematic random sampling. Why I say it is systematic random sampling? This sampling method is also used mostly in forestry, where it is very difficult to go into forest and give the numbers and select the trees. So, in such a case systematic sampling is very important. So, systematic sampling means, what is systematic sampling? In systematic sampling, first unit is selected at random, and other units are automatically selected. So, this is also very important, and the systematic sampling relies on arranging the target population according to some ordering scheme, and then selecting elements at regular interval through that order list. Second thing is that systematic sampling involves a random start and then proceeds with the selection of every k elements from them onwards. In case k is suppose k equal to population size or sample size, then population size divided by n will be nothing but a k. So, it is important that the starting point is not automatically the first in the list, but is instead randomly chosen from within the first to the kth element in the list. So, this is very important. What is important in systematic sampling? You have to select the first unit randomly and other units are automatically selected. So, this type of sampling is also used, and here you are using randomly first one, but after that, suppose one example is given here, that suppose if you select randomly 20 number, and suppose we want to have the interval of say 30. So, 20 plus 30 means 50 is selected, 50 plus 30 is 80 is selected, 80 plus 80 110th unit will be selected. So, this is the first unit is selected randomly and other units are automatically selected. I have also taken these slides from internet where the systematic sampling is to be shown here, how it has been selected. So, here also systematic sampling, here 8 units is selected and your interval is 20. So, 28 is selected here, then 8 is selected, after that 20 the interval is there. So, 28 is selected and 28 plus 20 means 48 is selected. So, this is the way by which the unit selected is 8, 28, 48, 68 and 88. So, this way we can select the samples using systematic sampling. So, this is sampling is very simple and very useful sometimes, but there are certain advantages and disadvantages. My dear students, you see what are the advantages? Sample, this sampling is easy for selection because first units to be selected randomly, others will be automatically selected. Then suitable sampling frame can be identified easily for this systematic sampling. Sample evenly spread over entire reference population. This is also one of the advantage. There are some disadvantages also, that also we have to look into that. So, this sample may be biased if hidden population coincide with that of selection, difficult to assess precision of the estimate from one survey. Then we have seen now friends simple random sampling, in which without modifying population we are selecting the samples. Then we have seen systematic sampling, in which first unit is selected randomly, other units are automatically selected. Next important sampling design is a stratified random sampling. This sampling is also very important in sampling and in research also, because most of the times we get a heterogeneous population, and in heterogeneous population if you select the simple random sample, the sample selected may not be representative. So, in this case we divide the heterogeneous population into homogeneous subgroups called strata, and from strata each sampling unit is selected. From the strata, from each unit we select a simple random sample. This type of sampling gives the name, that is a stratified random sampling. This is very important, that heterogeneous population is divided into homogeneous subgroups called strata, and from each strata independent simple random sample is taken. So, this sampling gives accurate and good results, as heterogeneous population is divided into homogeneous subgroups as compared to simple random sampling in most of the cases, not in all cases, but in most of the cases it gives like that. So, you can see that strata is here, then single unit is called stratum. Every unit in a stratum has a chance of being selected using same sampling fraction for all strata. Proportionate representation in the sample is given. Adequate representation of minority subgroups of interest can be ensured by stratification, and varying sampling fractions between strata are as required. So, stratified sampling is very important. So, this is important because stratified sampling is most commonly used in the research, as this is in which we divide the heterogeneous population into homogeneous subgroups, and for each subgroups we are selecting a simple random sampling. But these are the there are also certain drawbacks also of this stratified random sampling. The sampling, if you do not know the population, then it is very difficult to divide the heterogeneous population into homogeneous subgroups. And in this case, if you do not know the population and if you are not able to divide the heterogeneous population into homogeneous subgroups, the sampling, that unit that is selected may not be representative. So, this is the important thing in stratified random sampling. Otherwise, this is a very important sampling which is commonly used nowadays in a research. So, certified random sampling means we can have different heterogeneous population can be grouped together. This also I have taken from the internet, and this we can see that very heterogeneous population is there. Some old persons are there, young persons are there, their behaviors are different. So, we can select the samples this way. This is there. So, heterogeneous population is subdivided in different groups. This is important thing, and certified random sampling is commonly used nowadays in a research. Thank you very much.